Everyone. Today I am about to discuss with you an Afro-Caribbean poem titled Colonization in Reverse, written by the famous Jamaican folklorist and poet Louise Bennett Coverley. She is so affectionately called as Miss Lou. So, as the title indicates, Colonization in Reverse, this poem is an act of resistance. So let's get into the poem and see what the speaker has to tell us. I hope you all will enjoy it.
Louise Bennett Coverley, or Miss Lou. A multifaceted genius, Louise Bennett was a Jamaican folklorist, poet, and a radio and television personality. She was called the mother of Jamaican culture for her efforts to popularize the native language, Jamaican patois. Her poems celebrate the lives of ordinary Jamaicans. In 1942, she published her first poetry collection, Dialect Verses. After graduating from the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, she hosted the BBC radio shows Caribbean Carnival and West Indian Night. She later taught folklore and drama at the University of the West Indies and served as director of the Jamaican Social Welfare Commission. Her popular albums include Jamaican folk songs and children's Jamaican songs and games. She delivered highly popular radio monologues known as Miss Lou's Views from 1966 to 1982. She also hosted a weekly children's television show, Ring Ding. Her best known book, Jamaica Labrish, a collection of folklore and poetry, appeared in 1966. Bennett Coverley was made Member of the Order of the British Empire in 1960. She received the Order of Jamaica in 1974 and the Jamaican Order of Merit in 2001. I would like to speak about Jamaica while discussing this poem. Jamaica is an island country in the West Indies. It is the third largest island in the Caribbean Sea. Its national capital is Kingston. Christopher Columbus in 1494 called it San Diego, but the original indigenous name of Jamaica or Jamaica has persisted. Christopher Columbus has called this island the fairest isle that eyes have beheld. The island's various Spanish, French, and English place names are remnants of its colonial history. The great majority of its people are of African ancestry, the descendants of slaves brought by European colonists. Jamaica was under colonial rule for hundreds of years, starting in 1509 with the Spanish, transferring to England in 1670, and finally gaining independence on August 6, 1962. Jamaica remains a member of the Commonwealth. English, the official language, is commonly used in towns and among the more privileged social classes. Jamaican Creole or Patois is also widely spoken. Jamaican Creole is a mother tongue formed from the contact of a European language such as English, French, Spanish, or Portuguese with local languages. So let's read the poem once, Colonization in Reverse. And I have written the original poem in the left side, which is written in Jamaican Patois, and on the right side you can see the translation of the poem in English. So for convenience I'll be reading the translation. What joyful news, Miss Mattie! I feel like my heart will burst. Jamaicans are colonizing England in reverse. By the hundreds and the thousands, from rural and Kingston ground, by the shiploads and the plane loads, Jamaica is England bound. They are pouring from Jamaica, Everybody's future plan is to get a high class job and settle in the motherland. What an island, what a people! Men and women, old and young, are packing their bags and barrels and turning history upside down. Some people don't like to travel, but just to show their loyalty, they are opening their very own cheap fare to England agencies. Week by week, the volume of countrymen shipping out gets higher, all to populate and saturate the seat of the empire. Do you see how life is funny? Do you see the irony? Jamaicans are now the ones with English folks' money. Once they get to England, they settle in their different roles. Some will get right down to work, but some will settle for the dole. Jane says the doll is not too bad because they will pay her £2 a week to find a job that she is well suited for. I think Jane will never find work at the rate that she claims to look. For all day long she sits on Aunt Fan's couch and reads her romance book. What confusion and excitement in England! They faced war and braved the worst. But I am wondering how they will manage colonizing in reverse. So that's about the poem. I hope you would have understood it. And now I shall give you a historical background of the poem. After World War II, Britain was faced with two challenges: a damaged infrastructure that need immediate repair and laborers willing to do tedious work. In 1948, the government set up a working party to consider employment of colonial labor and came up with the British Nationality Act. This act granted the unskilled workers and some veterans from the islands entry into the country and British citizenship. The Windrush Generation. Ember Windrush, the British ship, travelled to Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Barbados, already colonized by the United Kingdom, seeking aid. On June 22, 1948, the ship SS Empire Windrush returned with some 500 passengers aboard. The Windrush Generation refers to Caribbean nationals who arrived in Great Britain as immigrants under the British Nationality Act of 1948. Due to successful advertisements from the United Kingdom, thousands more Jamaicans, Trinidadians, and Barbadians travelled with their children to Great Britain to work and begin a new life. Afro-Caribbean citizens today. When Caribbean nationals arrived in Great Britain, many of them brought with them their music, religion, clothing style, food, social institutions, and customs that deeply influenced British culture. Later, they were recognized as Afro Caribbean British citizens. And the poem which we are discussing today has a relevance because today many people of the Windrush generation who do not have British citizenship, despite having lived and been formally educated there for decades, are now facing deportation. Analysis. The poem Colonization in Reverse emphasizes the idea of leaving one's home country to start a new life somewhere else. Moving to Britain will provide Jamaicans with opportunities that they could not be afforded in Jamaica. However, if Jamaicans leave the island and move to Britain, which is their motherland, the speaker argues it would be an experience similar to the British colonizing Jamaica. The poet says that it is a willful and aggressive act, one that springs from the blood-stained history of colonialism and slavery in the Caribbean. Miss Lou, the speaker of the poem, gives a comical and hyperbolic account of the contemporary events. We can see in the beginning that Miss Lou is addressing Miss Mattie, her friend, through the poem. So, although her zealous description of the post war exodus from Jamaica may magnify the truth in order to impress her friend Miss Mattie, it gives stinging insights concerning the historical conditions that occasioned this migration. It is clear to Miss Liu, for instance, that the relation between Britain and Jamaica is far from the benign one conjured up by the cliche image of the motherland. Instead, that relation is grounded in exploitative and at times violent colonial power. And motherland is used ironically in the poem because though the Jamaicans look at the British with admiration and awe, the treatment meted out to the Jamaicans in return is not so motherly. To migrate to the motherland is then to issue a radical challenge to this history of subjugation. The passengers on the Empire, Windrush, Miss Lou says, will turn history upside down. If Caribbean people become parasites on the British welfare state, Ms. Lou argues implicitly, they are simply engaging in an inversion of the long colonial history of expropriation and exploitation. The British have won many battles, including wars, but the speaker wonders how they will handle all the Jamaicans going to their motherland. Now that the roles are reversed and Jamaicans are becoming the colonizers, by going to England and living and working there, the speaker ponders upon how Britain will react and respond. Miss Jane. A note on Miss Jane, who is seen in the poem. In the metropolis, former colonial subjects can refuse work that does not suit their dignity, a luxury that was obviously seldom a possibility for the vast majority of the colonized. Miss Lou's young friend Jane engages in the kind of everyday acts of sabotage that were important weapons in the arsenal of the racially oppressed in Britain. She loves, she is very lazy. She refuses to look for a job that doesn't satisfy her. She brazenly exploits Britain's relatively generous welfare state. The racist stereotypes conjured up by Miss Liu do not, however, relate simply to economic issues. For while she sits at home collecting public assistance, Jane is reading romance novels. This suggests that she is not simply an unproductive subject, but is also endowed with an active emotional and sexual imagination. Through the figure of Jane, colonization in reverse evokes the phobic image of black women's reproductive capacity. Post war Britain focused on the reproduction of a pure body politic in the construction of national identity, and as immigrants began arriving from the colonies, concerns about the constitution of the British people were increasingly aired. Language and identity. Another aspect which I have to discuss in the poem, that is, the long history of British rule or colonization is reflected in both Jamaica's language and customs, and it became important for the nation to define a new identity to match their new independence. Speaking in terms of language in molding the nation, Bennett, through her poems, brought in the debate about whether the national language should be Standard English, Jamaican dialect, or a mixture of both. Because during the colonization, the natives were imposed upon the misconception of speaking their native dialect as bad and vulgar language, proclaiming that only the Standard English holds a class. This often led to conflicted attitude towards speech among the middle class and rising classes of people in the post-independence period. Reggae Revolution. The Reggae Revolution, a fusion of different musical eras and styles coupled with a message of unity and hope, also addressed the issue of language and power struggle. The revolution was about whether only those who speak standard English should be allowed to have power. People who spoke with a Jamaican dialect questioned and protested as to why they should be considered less of a citizen just because of the way they speak. Act of resistance. Resistance. Bennett worked to disprove this idea that dialect is bad and vulgar by writing solely in dialect. She wanted to represent the people of Jamaica, especially the everyday citizen, and so reintroduced their oral language. Since she wrote in Creole, many people credit her with the rediscovery of Creole as an accepted language and art form. The poem Colonization in Reverse does not simply document acts of sly sabotage engaged in by the immigrants. In addition, the poem itself is an act of resistance. Bennett's use of the Creole vernacular or patois is part of a nationalism from the bottom up that has consistently animated diasporic writers and artists in Britain. Most of Bennett's poems follow a traditional British form, the ballad form from Romantic poetry. So, Colonization in Reverse is also written in the form of a ballad which was used in oral form. Therefore, Bennett is both borrowing this form of writing from the colonizers as well as changing it. Such an appropriation is part of her effort to legitimize her poetry and give it a distinctly Jamaican flavor. Through her writing in dialect, Bennett is telling Jamaicans that it is acceptable to speak this way. She does not understand why people would want to get rid of their dialect. The use of the language in itself is a form of resistance. So that's about the poem, and these are some of the references I have used. Branca Nichols' Language, Gender and Identity in the Works of Louise Bennett and Michelle Cliff. Then Ashley Dawson's Mongrel Nation, Diasporic Culture and the Making of Post-Colonial Britain. And Dennis Scott's Bennett on Bennett, an interview. Thank you so much.